The Ahmed Kathrada Foundation is briefing on Gordhan's passing at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and we're likely to be crossing to that quite shortly.
The statement that was released early this morning, but just to repeat a few lines from there, and it is with profound sadness that the Gordhan family announces the passing of former Minister Pravin Gordhan. Mr. Gordhan passed away peacefully in hospital, surrounded by his family, closest friends, and his lifelong comrades in the liberation struggle in the early hours of this morning. And the rest of it you have with you. We want to say that the funeral will take place on Thursday in Durban, and it will be an official funeral. And that it will be followed by a private cremation after the funeral itself. But that further details on this would be forthcoming from government and particularly from the presidency. But it's happening in Durban on Thursday. So before his passing, PG wrote his last words that were delivered at a meeting commemorating the 130th anniversary of the Natal Indian Congress. And PG's daughter, Priyasha, will read this. And it is a powerful address that I think has so much of relevance to the broader issues of South Africa today, and is a most wonderful tribute to him that we are able to read it here, and by his daughter. Priyasha, you want to do it from here? Thank you.
This was my dad's last official speech that he wrote whilst ill. It's his message to the 130th anniversary of the formation of the National Indian Congress.
Mike.
Chair.
Can we just get the mic? Doesn't seem to be working yet. Is there anybody from the foundation? Just help us with this.
Maybe it's just the angle. It's just the angle.
It's either the mic's not working or the hearing aids. But we'll check. We'll first check the mics.
I think this room has only people who know how to sabotage.
No?
All right, so we are on visuals of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, where they are giving a media briefing following the passing of Pravin Gordhan. His daughter is there, just about to give a speech that he wrote just before he passed.
Sani Banani, Namaskar, Assalamu alaikum, Vanakkam. Greetings to comrades Mac Maharaj and Khalima Maklante. Congratulations to the organizing team for arranging this 130th year commemoration of the formation of the Natal Indian Congress. This is an opportunity for us to reflect on the past decades of political developments and, more importantly, to highlight the values and spirit that was embedded in the Congress movement and how they should be reinvigorated in the years ahead. This is also an opportunity to reflect on the last 60 or 70 years after the signing of the Dadu Duma Naika Pact. This pact laid the political basis for unity in action amongst all oppressed communities, the Defiance Campaign and the Anti-Group Areas Act campaign and many boycotts, the Congress of the People and the formulation of the Freedom Charter, our lodestar, a set of values, a progressive political culture, and the understanding that activists and leaders were serving a greater cause, freedom and democracy, not serving one's self-interest. Today we reflect on the gap that has developed between those values, integrity and dedication to the national interest on the one hand, and the self-interest, greed and corruption we find on the other. It is time for a reset. All progressives, including those with a Congress orientation, must reinvigorate the so-called old values and reassert those values. Anti-democratic tendencies must be eclipsed by a commitment to national interest and to public service. This epidemic of promoting oneself and accumulating wealth through patronage and authority within the state must be anathema to genuine democracy. Let us briefly look at the 70s and 80s. The NIC was relaunched in 1971. As the late Farooq Mir said, our intention was to fly the Congress flag and the Freedom Charter within the country. It was the only arm of the Congress movement that was not banned. The 70s marked the emergence of the Black consciousness movement, a period of intensified mobilization. Trade unions were activated, student campuses were alive and active. There were initiatives from the progressives and Congress throughout the country to set up different types of organizations in order to both mobilize people and to confront the apartheid system. These organizations eventually formed the United Democratic Front. By the late 70s, the first campaigns against organs of apartheid, like the LACs, were extremely successful, and later the puppet SAIC and the tricameral system. This was combined with the armed struggle, building the underground, and international mobilization against the apartheid system. So also began the process of linking struggles around local grievances, rentals, housing, workplace issues, facilities, and the larger political disenfranchisement. By the early 80s, there was an emerging convergence between the local and national challenges to lay the basis for the Release Mandela campaign and the launch of a non-racial internal political leadership. The formation of the United Democratic Front in 1983 and COSATU in 1985 made a huge contribution to the intensification of the internal struggles. The underground of the ANC and the SACP were well entrenched and widespread in our communities and organizations. Activists were a part of a union, movement, or a social organization at one level, but also members of the underground at the same time. Today, our task is, if I may humbly suggest, to advance the values of genuine democracy, of a democratic culture, and to ensure that the country progresses in the right direction, that its institutions of democracy, created by the Constitution, are made state capture proof. We cannot again have a national prosecuting authority, certain arms of law enforcement, and the Public Protector's Office recaptured for abuse by those whose only intent is to fill their own bank accounts. Democracy will not survive on its own. Democracy must be constantly secured and enhanced. In many parts of the world, democracy is being undermined by right-wing populism, massive inequality, identity politics, geopolitical tensions, and authoritarianism. The super-rich are imposing an inordinate influence on democracy. Democracy must be entrenched, and more work must be done among society to own and defend it. Integrity and ethical conduct in our politics appears to be sadly declining. Populism seemingly represents the interests of the majority of South Africans, but actually represents the interests of just a few. Those that are active in either political, social, or non-governmental fields must all contribute to working in the public and national interest as opposed to self-interest. Further, we must draw a clear line between public funds and resources and private resources. Public funds must be spent to improve the standard of living of the poor, their upward economic mobility, and to build an inclusive economy. Yet what we have is a plethora of extractors, particularly at a local level, tenderpreneurs, extortionists, and mafias. There are many lessons from our past. Now is the time for those that are progressive, politically and socially active in the non-governmental field to come together to ensure that we build consensus around a common platform of progressive politics, not focus on ourselves, but rather on what we can do for the majority of our people, and improve the standard of living of South Africans expeditiously and ethically. Let us open a new chapter on united progressive mass mobilization and campaigning which builds national unity, social cohesion, and a new optimism and determination to build a better South Africa. Thank you for the opportunity to make this contribution to the celebration of the 130th anniversary today.
You can get a sense it's almost like marching orders to the streets, to the streets, to the streets. There's a vehicle BR00GLGP, it's an Audi. If you could just move it, you seem to be blocking either the driveway or somebody else. Now, somebody who could probably speak for hours here about his relationships with PG is Mac Maharaj, but Mac has agreed that he'll limit it to probably just a day-long input. But Mac has probably in this room the longest relationship with PG, and it's an honor and a privilege to ask Mac to come and share his tribute. But let me also acknowledge, whilst Mac is coming up, the presence of the ANC Veterans League here today, Snooki Zikalala, Mavuso Msimang, Faisal Randera, amongst others. Your presence is just hugely appreciated. Thank you very much. Comrade Mac.
Thank you, Comrade Chan. Colleagues, today I'm filled with deep sadness. A sadness that Pravin should pass away so soon after he retired, in the hope that he will have more time to spend with his family. My thoughts go out to his wife, and I would stress his comrade in arms, Vanitha, his daughters Anisha and Priyasha, and all his extended family. I'm also seized with a profound sense of gratitude that I was able to share the freedom struggle trenches with Pravin, for he was an indomitable freedom fighter. Nothing that the enemy could marshal against him deterred him. He strengthened and he gave me knowledge that our struggle, even in this democratic era, is always about the people. For they, the people, are the makers of history, and ours is a duty to be their servant. Pravin was their servant of the struggle against apartheid and in the making of our democracy to deliver a better and a caring society. Pravin was their servant. He cared, he served, and he walked the path strewn with thorns, but he never faltered. He endured, he triumphed. So let us treasure the memory of this great servant of the people. I thank you.
Oh, thanks, Comrade Mac. Followed by somebody who went through the ordeals of working in Treasury with PG, and perhaps he'll reflect on that now. Mkabisi Jonas.
Thank you very much, Shan. And I'm just thinking that I'll try very hard to emulate Comrade Mac about being short enough. Let me thank everybody for gathering here today and joining us in this sad moment. What makes it even sadder is the fact that a couple of weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, if I'm correct, we all gathered to celebrate PG's exit out of public service. A lot of comrades and activists joined us in that endeavor, and a lot of people spoke about PG. And I was making a comment to somebody to say that actually, as I was looking at PG right through these comments and praises, I was getting a feeling that he was shrugging them off. And my comment was that probably he was shrugging them off because PG is the penultimate freedom fighter. He probably was gearing himself for another battle. And I was actually thinking that if he has another battle, I hope he doesn't throw me in. But little did we all know that the next battle would be a battle against a very vicious disease, cancer, which took his life. So it is really a sad moment that we watch him waste away within a very short space of time, but still experience the wisdom, the clarity and lucidity of thought that PG always had, and he enriched us even in his last days about what to do with South Africa. I'll say three things and shut up about PG. The first, I think, is probably what many people have spoken about, how PG was a revolutionary by excellence. Because sometimes we have these terms that we throw at each other, comrades, revolutionaries, etc. Sometimes they don't have meaning. Sometimes they're just words we use to distinguish ourselves from the rest. PG's revolutionary credentials stem from an absolute, complete commitment to the people, to the South African people. I met him many times, and I've spoken to him many times. One thing that strikes you in dealing with PG, life was about advancing the lot of the South African people. It was about how to take South Africa out of poverty, how to take it in a different trajectory, and how to deepen the work that the African National Congress in general, but also government specifically, was doing to improve the lot of our people. Now, when we say that, he also, in the course of that, collided with many of his comrades. If I can tell you one thing, the most difficult thing for any activist, it is when you stand against your comrades. It is when you have to confront the ills and wrongs that your own comrades are doing. And many of us falter in that task because many of us look away and not confront the challenge of correcting the wrongs of our own. And PG taught us one thing, that at moments when principle matters, we have to stand. You have to stand against your very own. And many people really, I can tell you, fail in that test. They will always look on the other side or accept what is not supposed to be accepted, simply because it is their comrade. Up until his death, PG was so focused on trying to deal with issues of corruption, to deal with issues of misdirection of the African National Congress and the country. He was still focused on ensuring that the country is brought back to the central path of dealing with all the political, social, and economic morass that the country was going through. My last point is, PG was a mobilizer, a strong mobilizer, basically. Mobilization sometimes is easy to talk about, because if you think about it, the first stance as a member of the ANC would be you're mobilizing the branch. There was a time when things were difficult in this country. There was a time that it was very clear and visible to anyone that the credibility and integrity of the ANC was completely undermined. We had rigorous discussions at that point, and many of the comrades who were part of these discussions are sitting here, Momo, and many of them, I won't call them, were part of that conversation. What do you do? And we took a very hard decision at that time, again led by PG, to say, let's mobilize society. And the question was, how do you mobilize society? And what constitutes society? I tell you now, within no time, PG was in the forefront, going out of ANC structures, going out of the normal alliance structures, to mobilize society against state capture, to mobilize society on a new agenda for strengthening and deepening democracy in this country. I can tell you now, with no fear of contradiction, that if PG didn't do that, the Guptas will still be in power. Oh, sorry, JZ will be still in power. But that's the kind of commitment that he had. He understood that the ANC is an agent for change. It is an agent for change. It is not an end in itself. The minute you look at the liberation vehicles as an end in itself, you must also know that your revolutionary credentials have come to an end. It is an important agent because if correctly organized, correctly focused, it could be the center point for remobilizing us around democracy, strengthening democracy, around non-racialism, around all of those things we believe in. But it is an agent. Agents fail sometimes, and agents succeed sometimes. But the principles don't fail. The principles are consistent, that our support to our organization must be based on principle, not based on the fact that this is our historic home, our forefathers and mothers belong to this, we grew up in this. We should be guided by principles. We should be guided by a belief for a better future for South Africans. And if our organizations don't do that as agents for change, we've got to do something to strengthen them, but we also have to do something to protect society from our own ills and our own cruelty. I end by saying that to the family of PG, and I know that if somebody says, I'm a daughter of Pravin Gordhan, I'm wife of Pravin Gordhan, people think, oh, that it must be nice for you. The reality is that most of the families of our leaders go through the most difficult time. Cruelty that is supposed to be directed at our leaders gets directed to their family. I always maintain that liberation movements generally have a humane agenda. But sometimes in executing that agenda, they are the most inhumane towards each other, the individuals towards each other. PG suffered. He suffered personally. We witnessed it. His family suffered. He was demonized by many, demonized to a point where even racial slurs were thrown at him. There was a time when others even thought it wise to attack him because they happened to think he is Indian. And if you talk to PG, those who know him, he was deeply non-racial. The Indian question in his mind was probably secondary, if not third issue. His first and foremost focus in life was that he is a human being dipped in a struggle to free the human beings from oppression and exploitation. And I think that if there's any gift we can give to PG, it is to reignite a strong South African spirit that fights against ethnicism, that fights against racism, that builds a society based on democracy and an egalitarian society. I thank you.
Thanks, Nkabisi. Next up is Derek Hanekom, who says that he shares the distinction of having been fired together with PG at the same time, and is going to talk about what that felt like now. Without the telephone call. Okay, smoke signals or whatever.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you all for being here. So the biggest claim to fame is that I was fired with Pravin Gordhan. I don't really need to say much more than that. So, let me start off firstly by acknowledging the presence of the leadership of the Veterans League. And I say that not because, I personally hold them in high regard and have a deep respect for the elected leaders of the Veterans League, but because Pravin put so much hope in the matters that the Veterans League were now taking up so vigorously in their attempt to renew the ANC and to restore the credibility of the ANC and the rightful role of the ANC. So, veterans, dear veterans, we really appreciate your work, but we say to you, keep it up with even more vigor in honor of Pravin Gordhan. So we have all of these. It's difficult to speak after the previous speakers because in a way they've said it all, and there's not much to add. But the cliche often used is, a gentle giant has fallen. Well, true, he was a giant, but not always that gentle. We're very clear about that. But on the other side, there was a gentle side and a compassionate side of Pravin Gordhan, which the public wasn't always aware of. A man that had intense loyalty to his comrades and his friends, and especially to his family. So here was the fighter, Pravin the fighter, the courageous, bold fighter, and Pravin, the loving man, loved his family like you wouldn't believe. And to be honest, the many things that Pravin has achieved during his life, he would not have been able to do, especially the latter years. The fights he took up that often were up against a terrible opposition, unprincipled opposition, and without the support of his family, he would not have been able to do it. So I think this amazing supportive family enabled Pravin to be a fighter until the very end. And a fighter not just for the sake of fighting, but a fighter for justice, a fighter for what is right. If we are going to pay one little tribute to Pravin, the biggest tribute that we can pay is to carry on with that fight. And that is the thing that he would have wanted of us more than anything else. We can put roses on his grave and flowers on his grave, and we can do all of the things that might be done when a person passes away. But more than anything, he would have liked us to carry on with that struggle, because the struggle indeed was his life. He lived a life completely dedicated to the struggle for non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. That was his life until the very end. So it's really an honor to speak here today, but also an honor to be with somebody like Mac Maharaj. Because Mac Maharaj is still with us, and we're grateful that he's still with us. And he is exactly the same. Mac Maharaj will struggle until the very end. So a tribute to you, Mac, while you're still alive and with us, and we expect you to be with us for a long time to come. You better be. Okay. He's committed himself publicly. But one thing you know of somebody like Mac, he will never give up. He will fight the fight until the bitter end. And I think that is the message to us, is keep up that fight. And do it wherever you are. We don't all have the kind of profile that a Pravin Gordhan had or Nelson Mandela had, but we have our own little corners. We have our own little opportunities and moments when we take up issues of justice. We take up issues affecting the poorest of our country, which are the issues that were so dear to Pravin Gordhan. For me personally, Pravin had a profound influence on my life. And it started in a very difficult struggle to to deal, as the former Deputy Minister has said, to deal with a very, very difficult situation, but to find ways of dealing with it, not just speaking out, but dealing with it effectively. And to make sure that this evil that was encroaching our society and taking over the governance of our country, and the real threat that our country would collapse in the face of unbelievable corruption, in the face of state capture, and to find effective ways of ensuring that that does not happen. So Pravin was a man of many dimensions, many chapters to his life, and one can speak forever and forever. I don't have notes in front of me, so I have to just, work on my inner clock and say my time of speaking has come to an end. But more appropriate than saying a giant has fallen is to say a humble servant of the people has fallen. And that's what Pravin was, a servant of the people, a servant for justice, doing and never seeking to be glorified, never seeking to be treated as a hero, and yet he was a remarkable hero. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Derek. I think people were waiting to hear some of the inside stories and, some of the more juicier parts of what happened in those fights in the NEC but I'm sure you'll do that when your memoirs come out. Mandla and Comfe worked with Pravin as an advisor for a fairly long time in his different ministerial posts. Mandla and I went to CPG probably about a month or just immediately after the elections to start talking about his plans. But what we learned was that we could not compete with, I'm not sure if it was the French Open or Wimbledon, the semi-finals. And we just could not compete with it. He would talk to us, but his eyes were focused on the TV. And eventually we decided it was a hopeless cause, and we just left quietly from there. I don't even know if he noticed that we left. We did see him in the hospital, and he simply said to us, chaps, continue with the fight, continue with connecting all of these dots. And then he went back to sleep. Mandla, you want to share some of your perspectives? But I see you got a long note there. It's a thesis, but you're going to summarize, right?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Comrade Shan. And also to speak in front of veterans of the ANC and leaders of our movement. Now, let me start by saying I come from Soweto. Pravin comes from Durban. I'm part of what Oliver Tambo called the Young Lions, that generation. So in that sense, Comrade Shan, other than the almost 10 years that I've been with Comrade Pravin, I have also been with him almost close to 40 years in different capacities as such. And as young people, Shan is there, himself, Resh is here, and a lot of young lions. And I'm probably speaking for even the office. Ntabi Singh is here. There's a lot of lessons that we actually got from Comrade Pravin. I think the angle that I want to bring is the humanity of Comrade Pravin, because revolutionaries sometimes are looked at as very clinical, very cold, without any sense of humanity. And what is that sense of humanity? There are a lot of words that are coming out of that. One of them is the issue of compassion. Another one is empathy, and a whole range of other ways of responding to the vulnerable and powerless people within society. So that was Pravin for us. But within this notion of humanity, and a lot of people have spoken about that, is activism. Now, Pravin never saw himself as a politician. He would actually respond very badly if you say he's a politician. He had this skeptical notion around politics, short-termism, etc., etc. So the issue of activism and being an activist to the last is what defined him, and the sense of service to the people. So that's one part of it. We learned a lot from him insofar as thinking strategically in our deliberations, and he had this clinical mind of getting through complex issues, and reveal the essence of what needs to be done. So in that sense, I think he actually groomed a lot of people. So he was a leader, he's a mentor, a builder, and everything. But him as an activist, another notion is organization. So Pravin was not, in my view, this grand theoretician. So there's a role for theoreticians and ideologues in the movement. But Pravin was organization, strategy, tactics, and all that. So that for me is very important. And he actually instilled that to a lot of us who were working with him. So organization is one thing. Now, Shan, the one thing that I think people don't know about Pravin is his commitment to the ANC and to the organization. And you would say, but inside the ANC, outside the ANC, you have all these attacks. But, like typical old cadres will say, it's the ANC. I must follow what the ANC, in the context of also what he thought needed to be done. So the issue of collective was very important. He was a builder, a father, an inspirer, and those of you who have worked with him would know that some of the things that he would say is not just things that come from him, but he would have canvassed those ideas with a lot of people. So when he talks, you will hear your contribution in his articulation of things. So organization, collectivism is one thing. So I say he was a kind of a party man as such. But in that humanity of him, I think Derek raised that thing, is the stubbornness of character, is the boldness of vision, is the boldness or is the determination to see through whatever needed to be done in a very clinical way. So he wouldn't do any other thing. Now, these were the attributes of him. And the fact that he was able to stomach the attacks that were there, the resilience, etc., I think is a testament to his strength of character as a person. He would always say conviction is very important. Somewhere, if you talk about SOEs, I must say that this was, I think, in the very first place, a very poison chalice. Because that's where the site of state capture was, and the fights. And he went through very well with it. And my sense of it is the SOEs now, there are green shoots in a number of areas. But what we learned, one lesson, is that nothing is impossible if your vision, your strategy, your implementation is there. Pravin would push things to the brink. You think that, no, we're not going to get this thing, but he will get it. And all of you will say, how did we come out of this thing? So that was for him. I think it's the chair of our foundation who says that there's one, what Priyasha was reading. He was preoccupied with what it means to be progressive today. What is the new form of progressiveness as such, so that becomes the basis on which you mobilize and organize people. So this issue of progressiveness is very important. For him, the issue of social justice was important. The issue of non-racialism and also, very importantly, gender parity, etc. So, for me, that defines the humanity of Pravin Gordhan. But like the others have said, for him, family was the center of his life. It was a source of strength and support, particularly in challenging times. And unfortunately, the attacks also came to the family. Priyasha will tell you, we were at vets at some point. She became a student leader herself, fought back, defending, etc. So it was actually very bad. But he remained committed to public service as such. So I think for the youth and the future generations, we should draw inspirations from Pravin's life. That firstly, leadership should be synonymous with a steadfast commitment to serving South Africans, and that's the issue of national interest. Serving them with their needs so that those needs come first. And this is what he's saying to the NIC. And for us, therefore, to achieve this, we must safeguard, we must defend and enhance the institutions of our republic, because the issue for him was the institutions. Despite the challenges and setbacks, in my view, South Africa's future remains bright. What we need to do now, which is not there, and more than ever, is ethical, courageous, and bold leadership that he has shown. And I hope that we'll follow with that type of leadership with the courage of convictions and all that. And therefore, we're going to be revolutionaries who are humane revolutionaries, not slaughters of our people, or people with a social distance and all. So thank you very much for giving this opportunity to speak in his honor. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandla. Thank you, Mandla. The reorganization, the revitalization of SARS took place when Trevor Manuel was Minister of Finance. And Trevor will now share some perspectives with us. Over to you, Trevor.
Thank you very much, Sean. Good afternoon to all of you, Priyasha, and in their absence, your mom and Anisha. I don't want to talk about SARS. We can write a book about that. I thought I want to raise a few other issues just because I can be difficult. So one of the questions that arises is, and virtually everybody who spoke about this commitment that Pravin demonstrated every day of his life throughout his adult life. The question is, what was the origin of it? And I went back and looked, because we know that Gramsci was an important influence in PG's life. Nobody held a conversation with him. So Mandla, he was a theoretician. But Gramsci says this: you must realize that I'm far from feeling beaten. It seems to me that a man ought to be deeply convinced that the source of his own moral force is in himself, his very energy and will, the iron coherence of ends and means that never falls into those vulgar, banal moods, pessimism and optimism. You asked Pravin about what drove him. Why was never pessimistic in the face of anything? You could go back to this as part of his origins. But right at the very end, I was privileged to visit him in the ward on Tuesday, and I went in with SABC, and he looked at us and laughed and said, "Hey, broers, you are here. Thank you very much for coming." And then he said, with the greatest courage, "As you can see, the end is nigh." And so as he lived with courage of conviction, without regrets about the path that he'd chosen in life, right to the very end, Pravin was able to demonstrate the same determination, the same singleness of purpose in the way in which he addressed issues. Two little points, bookends. The first would be from late 70s, early 80s, when transformation had to happen in South Africa. You will find that the transition to mass mobilization had PG's DNA all over it. You know, there were struggles in the 50s and mass campaigns in the 50s, and then the struggle was badly mauled. There was a 76 uprising, but the idea that you should form people into organizations that represent their interests, starting with PG and them in Seacow Lake, and building out from that campaign to civics is an important issue. So by the time the UDF was launched, the civic movement was fundamentally important in all of that, and the Durban Housing Action Committee was one of the flywheels that gave rise to mass participation in struggle. The other issue, and I just want to amplify, so that's the one bookend. You can track it through then. What happens after that into the UDF, into general uprising in the country. And then the other part I'd like to come to is the issue that PG's attacked about, and that is his tenure in the Ministry of Public Enterprises. I want to amplify the point that Mandla just made. Almost the sole objective of state capture was to liquidate all of our state-owned enterprises. I can draw a distinction between the privilege I had of being Minister of Finance when there was very little debt in our public enterprises and no transfers from the fiscus to any of them. But what happened during the period of state capture is that everything was stolen from the public enterprises. And so by the time PG's assigned that department, the cupboards are bare. The debt is high. You look at the debt service costs for Transnet Eskom, the list is endless. He had to work with the hand he was dealt. And that context becomes quite important. And the point that Mandla raises about green shoots happens in an environment where you say, the destruction has happened, the task now is to rebuild. And I think it's fundamentally important that we recognize PG's role in that rebuilding, in that giving a new sense of purpose and place to our state-owned enterprises. What cannot be disputed by anybody is his lifelong commitment to his beliefs and the way he lived, his commitment to ensure that everything was done to build a cadre who could follow, and the success of every step of the way. Lastly, his very fine strategic sense was always there. There were initiatives that nobody would have considered. I should say here as well that the idea of a broad united front was given rise to on the balcony of the flat that he lived in Prince Edward Street above his father's sari shop. And from there, it took roots. The UDF became that idea found purpose in society. He could always take a long view on life and ensure that there was commitment to see it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Trevor. Our last speaker here, and can I just check where's this roving mic? Sheila Sisulu. Sheila will just talk about her recollections and her perspectives on PG's life, his contribution. And we're happy today that you don't have to navigate the pathways of Cornhill that you had to do the other night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. And let me first start by conveying my sincere condolences to Pravin's family, and say how in one of the meetings that we had, I think it was Save South Africa, when we were supposed to have accompanied him to court, and instead we had a mass meeting at some hall, church hall in Pretoria. And you know how it is that when people are gathered in that kind of place, then they treat a person like Pravin as a celebrity, and we all want to rush around him. And at some point I saw him stop and almost, oh, okay, and stop people from crowding him, not because he was being unkind, but he actually wanted to get his wife, who was being crowded out and away from him. It was just a small gesture that probably people missed, and I'm glad at that point he introduced her to me, and I've always had it in my mind. The other recollection was that he spoke against and worked against everything that was wrong in our government and in our organization at the time. But he was never cruel, never unkind, but firm in his beliefs. So around the time when he was, before the big meeting, when he was clearly being isolated for attack, I called him and said, can we have coffee? And I emphasize coffee, not tea, We met at a cafe in a cafe in Pretoria. And we really were talking about this and that, and for me it was to say to him, there are many of us who are here physically and openly with you. At the end of our coffee, I asked for a picture, and he said to me, Comrade Sheila, you're not afraid? I said, no, I actually am very proud to be able to have this moment with you. And of course, all hell broke through. Yesterday, I was very happy that I had a moment, or day before yesterday, a moment to talk about SARS. You can love it or hate it. As someone would say, SARS, being in SARS, or people relating to SARS, SARS could never do right. It was like, there's a saying in Sepedi, Mac, that says, it was like a royal cow. If you meet it in the wilderness and you drive it to the royal kraal, you might get into trouble. Because why? Where was this cow? Were you trying to steal it? If you don't save it from whatever, why didn't you save it? So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. So I was one of those who had still have a love-hate relationship with SARS. But I would never, ever take away from the fact that all of government would not have been able to do half of what government was able to do as a result of the work of Pravin in building up SARS into a formidable, highly respected entity. Even at the time, and when the hyenas were baying for his blood and wanting to get into, well, they did get into SARS and try and destroy it. The foundation was so strong, it was able to withstand all those attacks. It's actually a metaphor for Pravin himself, that they tried to destroy him from every end. And because of who he was, they failed. And today, as we celebrate his life, we celebrate a formidable comrade, a man of integrity, a baobab that is able to withstand all kinds of weather and be an inspiration to all who come into contact with him. So I'm glad my comrades from the Veterans League are here. I know the working on making the organization get back to its glory days. It's not been easy, it's not easy, it will not be easy, but we owe it to people like Pravin. And we're thankful that Meg is with us as well to continue this hard work, because the organization and the country and the people of South Africa deserve an organization such as the ANC to get back to its glory days and serve the people of South Africa. Pravin, find peace. We are here. We are dedicating ourselves to continue your hard work for the people of South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ma'am Sheila. Before we open up for a round of questions, I thought just let me read to you, some words of PG in this book, this unauthorized biography. In it, he's quoted as saying, "No one can ever be satisfied that one knows it all. My life has been about learning and growing and adapting through the learning. I'll have to retire at some stage from formal politics and yet look for other ways within my ability and health of contributing. You can retire from a job, but you can't retire as an activist." It then goes on. He says he'd like to be remembered as just the activist who grew up on the streets of central Durban, who had the opportunity to contribute as a lifelong activist to building the changing South Africa, but also to build the institutions of democracy as one small contribution among many, many others. And how does he think he'll be remembered? Well, that depends on how you write the book. He laughs and then becomes serious. Actually, I think it will vary depending on what happens to the rest of my life. For the last 18 months, I've taken a lot of knocks for doing what we had to do in respect of SAA, for example. From an anti-corruption figure, I suddenly became stupid. And I was horrified the last 3 days to read the vitriol that was being spewed out, particularly on X. It was just the most disgusting content. I'm, however, very happy that I think this morning and going forward on all of the mainstream media, there's been a very different appreciation of Pravin. Some critical, and perhaps rightfully so in specific areas, but not the kind of just negative commentary for the sake of negative commentary that came before his death. And I hope going forward that when we introspect his life, it will be done on the basis of fact, not on fiction that I think that you would have heard in some of the radio stations this morning. So just to repeat, the funeral takes place in Durban on Thursday. It is an official funeral, will be followed by a private cremation, but the final details of that will probably come from the presidency over the next few days. The family have also asked for the media and the general public, for those who want to go and pay their respects, to do that after 3 today, and also when it is no longer possible, to really respect their time and all that they will be going through over the next few days. Lastly, across the length and breadth of South Africa, you don't need permission to celebrate PG's life. Do it in the ways that you think is most befitting and is within the ability of the organizations and the people there. Because I think his life is worth celebrating across the length and breadth of this country, not just in the formal events that will mark the next few weeks. The foundation and others will look at hosting a memorial event in Johannesburg next weekend. But again, there's a range of consultations that we would have to go through. But definitely next weekend there will be a memorial event. On that note, I'm hoping you've had too much of content so that there's not any question. But in the event that there is, can I ask that the questions and the comments be short?
All right, we're going to come out of that briefing on Pravin Gordhan following his passing by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. A number of speakers, prominent speakers, were speaking about his legacy, the likes of Trevor Manuel, Mcebisi Jonas, and the main theme that really came out was that he was an activist and he was completely committed to the welfare of South Africans, and that despite all the spears and arrows that he had to face when people judged him, they said that he was very resilient, and to his last moment, he wanted people to continue to fight against injustices that are taking place in the country. And so we continue.